Greetings of the day. Today I am here to discuss with you an interesting topic on the phenomenon of bioluminescence, that is, the emission of light by living organisms. Before going into the topic, I would like to share an incident with you, the secret of bioluminescence. It was back in 1990s, a marine biologist named Haddock. He had paid a visit to his fellow researcher, Shimomura, and they were engaged in a talk on bioluminescence. And during their meeting, at one point of their meeting, Shimomura, he had poured something which seemed to be large sesame seeds into his hand, dribbled out some water, and then he just crushed it in his fist. And what exciting happened was that it just glowed in his hand, giving a blue color, and it seemed to be like a fairy. And this was actually a phenomenon of bioluminescence. And Shimomura explained that way back when, during the Second World War, the Japanese army, they had harvested a lot of these organisms. And these organisms were actually the tiny bodies of crustaceans, namely the ostracods. And these organisms, they just produced these light, and the light was actually helpful for these soldiers to guide them in their maths and correspondence. So this was actually the ostracods which I was talking about. The ostracods which produce the bioluminescence, they were a type of crustaceans which were able to produce a chemical reaction whereby they developed a blue color, and those crustaceans, those helped this army, the soldiers, to find or to read their maths and correspondence. Now going into the topic, you have the bioluminescence, and bios indicates living and lumen which indicates light, and the name bioluminescence suggests the living light, which is a phenomenon which would be able to produce the light, or there is a production or the emission of light by the living organisms. It is a particular phenomenon that would occur both in the terrestrial and the oceanic environments, which is distributed or scattered among 66 genera from 13 different phyla. And even though I said this particular phenomenon, it is exhibited both by the terrestrial and the oceanic organisms, this adaptation is most extensively developed in the oceans. And it is scattered among the 13 orders, 45 families, and the phenomenon is mainly exhibited by the teleos and certain sharks. And these bioluminescent organisms, they do produce luminescent lights, as I had mentioned earlier. They produce this luminescence of blue or green, which ranges in a wavelength of about 475 nanometer. Coming to the occurrence, or where are these bioluminescent organisms found? See, these organisms, they are actually found in the oceans, as I had mentioned earlier. They are found in the surface waters, in the deep waters, the pelagic regions, the benthic regions, everywhere. But then most of the numbers, they are concentrated in the mid-oceanic region, a depth of 200 and 1200 meters, wherein you have 95% of fish and 86% of shrimps and squids exhibiting bioluminescence. And the rest, less than 10% of the organisms which occupies the surface waters, also do exhibit the property of bioluminescence, and a percentage of 25 organisms in the abyssal depths, that is the deeper regions, they are also found to exhibit the phenomenon of bioluminescence. And this is a picture showing the distribution of the oceanic zone, that is the diversity of the life in the oceanic region. So I was talking about bioluminescence, and I said where are these organisms being located or found in the oceanic environment. And now we'll just see how these light is emitted or light is produced, or what is the mechanism behind which the bioluminescence is produced. So it is actually, the luminescence is actually produced by means of a cold chemical reaction, wherein you have the luciferin, and combined with oxygen with the help of the enzyme luciferase, you have the oxyluciferin produced and the light getting emitted. And the light emitted is a bioluminescence light, and in most of the organisms, they do produce the blue or the green fluorescence, and except in one or few cases, certain fish, they also produce the red luminescence. So based on the types of luminescence produced or based on the kinds of luminescence produced by the fishes, these are actually classified into the intrinsic kinds of fish and the extrinsic kinds of fish wherein they produce a bioluminescence. Okay, intrinsic kind of bioluminescence and the extrinsic kind of bioluminescence. Intrinsic, as you know from the word intrinsic, you can make out. What would it be? It would be like, see, the body would be developing the luminescence by itself. Okay, so here you have the body, the fish body producing the light using the enzyme. Okay, so earlier I was saying how the enzyme is produced or how the bioluminescence is produced. So it is produced by a cold chemical reaction wherein you have the luciferin combined with the oxygen with the help of the enzyme luciferase. The light is getting emitted. Okay, so there is a luciferase system into the picture. Okay, so the intrinsic type of fish, they have its own luciferase system by which they do produce the luminescence. So they have this system in specialized organs, and those organs are known as the photophores. Okay, and these photophores, they would actually be innervated by the nervous cells, right? So that is the intrinsic kind of luminescence, and compared to this, we have the extrinsic kind of luminescence produced by the fish. And this extrinsic type of luminescence, unlike the intrinsic, wherein the intrinsic fishes, they do have its own luciferase system. Okay, but then this extrinsic type of fish, they lack their own luciferase system. Okay, instead, how do they produce the luminescence? Instead, they host a symbiotic bioluminescent bacteria in their body. Okay, so these bioluminescent symbiotic bacteria, they would be able to produce the luminescence, right? So these symbiotic bioluminescent bacteria, they would be located at specialized areas. So most probably they would be located within the diverticulum of the gut, or maybe certain areas under the eye. So wherein these kind of fish, they produce luminescence by means of the symbiotic bioluminescent bacteria. Okay, so based on the kinds of luminescence produced by the fish, we do have two types, the intrinsic and the extrinsic. The intrinsic type of fish, they produce luminescence based on the luciferase system present in the body, whereas the extrinsic kinds of fish, they do not have its luciferase system, but then they have the symbiotic bioluminescence bacteria within their body, which helps them to emit the luminescence. And see, we were talking about the bioluminescence and where does these organisms occur and what is the mechanism behind the production of these luminescence and everything. Fine. Now, what is the purpose of bioluminescence, or why do these organisms produce luminescence? Okay, so these luminescence, those are produced by the fish for a variety of reasons, and the first one would be for predation. So it is the deep waters wherein the light is limited. So for predation, they do have this particular bioluminescence so that they could locate the prey. Okay, so example would be the anglerfish, which would be familiar to you. Now for attracting the prey, again, this anglerfish, it has got a lure on its head, which is a modification of the dorsal fin, and this would be able to attract the prey. Okay, again, as a defensive mechanism, that is to get protection from the predators. Okay, example for which would be the hatchet fish, and camouflage, that is to again escape from the predators, wherein they just undertake the phenomenon of counter illumination. And counter illumination is a process wherein these organisms would be having the photophores underneath their body, or maybe that is to say on their ventral side, so that these would mimic the light reflected from the water surface, and then they would be unseen in the waters. Okay, so they would be used for camouflaging purpose, and again for recognizing the individuals of the same species, as for example in the case of schooling. So these are the various reasons why these organisms would produce a bioluminescence. So now we'll just have a look at the various fishes which do exhibit the different bioluminescent properties, or how do they exhibit the bioluminescent properties. So the first one would be the deep sea lantern shark, wherein these type of organisms, they have got the light organs on the dorsal spine. Okay, the light organs are located on the dorsal spine, and they make use of these light organs to visual signals that would deter its predators. Okay, and they would also exhibit the process of counter illumination. As I said, they would have the ventral photophores, which would mimic the light reflected from the waters, and thereby they could get out of the predators, and also they would attract the prey. The next example would be the cookie cutter shark, and this particular fish, it exhibits an unusual feeding behavior wherein they just bite some small round pieces of the flesh of the prey. And here they have the ventral photophore. See, it's visible from the picture. The first picture is actually its full layout of the body, and the second one you can see a tiny black color. Okay, so how the fish just assumes such a small shape? It's because they have got the ventral photophores, and these ventral photophores would mimic the light in the water surface, and they just shift, or they just illuminate the rest of the body, leaving a small portion of the body to be visible either by the predators or either by the prey. Okay, so thereby they have the camouflage property wherein they just escape from the predators, because the predators would think that it's such a tiny organism, and again for attracting the prey, wherein the prey would come to this particular organism thinking that it could be a meal for that particular organism. Why? Because they would see this organism as tiny organisms. But what happens instead is, those organisms which come to this fish, they would actually turn into the prey or turn into a big meal for these particular fish. Okay, so it's the photophores in this particular fish, the cookie cutter shark, which helps them in getting camouflage and also in attracting the prey. The next one, and another interesting fish would be the dragonfish, wherein this particular fish, see, it is visible from the picture. You have the lure here, and it is a modification of its chin, and it has got its lure, which helps in attracting the prey. And this particular, as I had mentioned during my first slides, I said the luminescence, it's mostly exhibited as blue or green lights in most of the fish. But in this fish, it is different. In addition to exhibiting the blue and the green luminescence, this fish also do exhibit the red luminescence. Okay, so they have the photophores, and they have the suborbital photophores, which produces the red luminescence, and the postorbital photophores, which is capable of producing the blue luminescence. The next fish, which is a very famous fish, the anglerfish, and this particular fish, it has got the luminescent lure at the tip of the modified dorsal fin ray. See, okay, this is a modified fin ray wherein there is a modification of the dorsal fin ray producing the lure at the tip, which is capable of attracting the prey. So it just lures, or it just illuminates to attract the prey. The next one would be the cardinal fish, and this particular fish, they have the ventral photophores, that is photophores being distributed towards the ventral side, and it just becomes active during the twilight. And this particular photophores are producing bioluminescence. Those photophores producing bioluminescence, they would be using light so as to detect and find the zooplankton. The next one would be the flashlight fish, and here the photophores, see, you can see here the photophores, they are actually located as a bean-shaped structure, the light organ underneath the eye, and this particular structure, it is able to attract the prey. Okay, so this does emit the light, and this is capable of attracting the prey, and again this helps in avoiding the predators. And another particular feature of the photophores of this particular fish, that is a flashlight fish, it helps in intraspecific communication, wherein they can form the schools or the groups. Okay, so in this particular fish, the flashlight fish, it has got the photophores and it produces the luminescence, and this particular fish, it is able to attract the prey and avoid the predators, and also this luminescence, it helps the fish in intraspecific communication. And bioluminescence, as I was talking about, it is a particular phenomenon and interesting phenomenon which is exhibited by different life forms, and mostly adapted, or mostly it's an adaptation towards a marine environment. Though it is being exhibited by different forms of life or different fish, it's very much diverse in fish, and the exact mechanism of which is still unknown, and it has to be or more researches has to be carried out so as to find out its exact mechanism. And whereby you can just produce, or you can just find out what actually is happening in the deep sea underwaters. Okay, and in spite of the sea, all these organisms which produces the luminescence, it always helps in illuminating the maps during the war, guiding planes to safety, making genes and proteins visible, and all these organisms get their glow always to help the humans. Thank you.